Formula E is harder than Formula 1. Surprised? Most people think F1 is the ultimate test of a driver's skill, but there's something about Formula E that pushes drivers in ways F1 simply cannot. It's not all about speed or technology. Sometimes it's about unpredictability, precision, and the unrelenting mental and physical demands as they race these all-electric machines. But why? What is it about Formula E that makes it such an unusual and brutal challenge? Let's start with the tracks. Formula E races on tight, twisty street circuits that wind through city centers, often on roads used daily by regular traffic. While F1 does have its fair share of street circuits such as Monaco and Singapore, most of its calendar is made up of purpose-built tracks, boasting sweeping turns, long straights, and crucially plenty of runoff areas. In Formula 1, if drivers push too hard in a corner, they can slide off into a generous stretch of asphalt, losing only a few lengths of a second before rejoining the track. In Formula E, there's no such luxury. The walls are right there. A momentary lapse in concentration, a missed braking point, or a lockup, and you're in the barriers. Race over. That changes everything. F1 drivers can afford to experiment with braking points and cornering speeds in practice, knowing they have a safety net. In Formula E, every lap must be approached with caution. There's no margin for error, adding another layer of mental pressure that F1 drivers rarely experience. You can't afford to run wide, lock up, or push too hard without paying the price in lost practice time or worse, a wrecked car. Speaking of practice, this is where Formula E truly throws a wrench into the works. Formula 1 race weekends consist of no fewer than 3 one-hour practice sessions, giving drivers ample time to familiarize themselves with the circuit and fine-tune the car setup, as well as gather data on tire performance and fuel consumption. By the time they reach qualifying, F1 drivers know every bump and ripple of the track. In Formula E, that's a luxury that drivers don't have. A typical Formula E weekend features just 2 practice sessions, each lasting only 30 minutes. That's 1 hour of total track time before qualifying. On unfamiliar evolving street circuits, that's barely enough time to get a feel for the car, let alone perfect a setup. It's a mad scramble to dial in the car, learn the corners, and figure out where the grip is, all within a handful of laps. And that's before we even get to the constantly evolving track conditions. Street circuits aren't used for racing every day. In many cities, the roads are dirty, dusty, and uneven, meaning the track changes dramatically throughout a session. In Diriyah, lap times gained a massive 12-second advantage between practice and qualifying, simply because of track evolution. So, drivers must grapple with a circuit that's constantly changing beneath them, making consistent braking points or cornering speeds hard to find. Now, about qualifying. Formula 1's knockout qualifying, Q1, Q2, Q3, allows drivers multiple opportunities to set a quick lap, often 2 runs per session. This lets Formula 1 drivers set a banker lap early on before pushing harder later. If something goes wrong on the first attempt, they can regroup and try again. Formula E is far less forgiving. Qualifying in Formula E is divided into 2 group sessions of 10 minutes each, where drivers must set the fastest lap to advance to the next round. From there, the process becomes even more grueling. The best drivers proceed to a head-to-head duel stage, where only one flying lap determines pole position. 1 shot, that's it. There's no warm-up lap and no second chance. Drivers have to get it right on the 1 lap or they're out. Overcommit and you crash. Take it too easy and your opponent goes through. To make it even more challenging, the car's power increases from 300 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts in the dual stages, meaning drivers have to be ready for an even quicker, more powerful car, just when all the pressure is on. The psychological pressure to nail a perfect lap under these conditions is immense. In Formula 1, drivers have the freedom to build confidence and shave off seconds lap after lap. In Formula E, you get 1 chance, and it must be perfect. Of course, no discussion about difficulty would be complete without mentioning the cars themselves. Formula 1 cars are the fastest racing machines in the world. They generate massive amounts of downforce to help them stick to the track through high-speed corners, and their advanced aerodynamics allow them to slice through the air with incredible efficiency. Formula E cars, however, are a different beast. They don't have the large front and rear wings of an F1 car, and therefore generate much less downforce. Most of the grip comes from a large diffuser channeling air under the car, but it's nowhere near as effective as the complex aero packages on F1 machines. The result, Formula E cars have much less grip and run on treaded tires instead of slicks. This lack of grip makes Formula E cars far more challenging to handle. Drivers are constantly managing wheel spin and oversteer, especially when exiting tight corners. In F1, the cars stick to the road like they're on rails. In Formula E, the cars are always dancing on the edge of control. You'll often see drivers sliding through corners, correcting mid-turn, and fighting the car, reminiscent of old-school racing rather than the precision of modern F1. And we haven't even mentioned the torque. Formula E cars have instantaneous torque thanks to their electric motors, which means power delivery is immediate and brutal. Coming out of a corner, the car wants to break traction. It takes serious skill to manage that power without losing control. Here's something that might surprise you. One of the biggest challenges in Formula E isn't physical at all, it's psychological. Unlike in Formula 1, where the roar of the engine is a constant companion, Formula E cars are almost silent. There's no engine noise to provide feedback, no rumble to indicate when to shift or when the power is coming on. For drivers accustomed to auditory cues from a traditional race car, this can be disorienting. In F1, drivers use the engine noise to judge acceleration, braking, and cornering speeds. In Formula E, they must rely entirely on feel. They must sense every tiny slip of the tires, every minor movement, and every slight variation in speed through the steering wheel and the seat of their pants. Lastly, there's the racing itself. Formula 1, for all its speed and technology, can sometimes be predictable. A dominant team or driver often locks out the front row and then runs away with the race. Last year, F1 had just 3 different winners across 22 races, with Max Verstappen dominating much of the season. Compare that to Formula E, where 7 different drivers won races in a 16-race season. The grid is often much closer in performance, making surprise winners far more common. This unpredictability ensures that no 2 races are alike. The competition is much tighter, and every driver on the grid has a shot at victory. Formula 1 may boast raw speed, but in terms of sheer difficulty and unpredictability, Formula E takes the crown. The narrow street circuits, limited practice time, shifting track conditions, unforgiving qualifying format, and unique challenges of steering an electric car all combine to create a motorsport test like no other.